In this news roundup for the week on 22nd of April 2022. Putin conducts a strange theatrical broadcast on Ukraine before heading off to test his new Satan II nuclear missile. China is struggling as its zero-COVID strategy finally begins to fall apart. The world braces itself for a world food crisis, and Boris Johnson loses another battle in his gradual political death of 1,000 cuts. My name is Malin Baker. This is the Malin Baker Show. We saw strange theatre in Russia yesterday as Vladimir Putin and his good friend and defence chief Sergei Shoigu had a live on-camera discussion about the conflict in Ukraine. Such set pieces have been a frequent feature of Putin's presidency, usually when the administration has picked up on a strong public sentiment. Putin represents himself as stepping into the fray on their behalf. In this case, he declared that the action to liberate Mariupol had been successful. Successful in the way that bombing something into a pile of dust strewn with the bodies of civilians can be called successful, I suppose. And he cancelled an order to storm the Azovstal steelworks, where remaining Ukrainian fighters and civilians are reportedly holed up. He claimed the move was unnecessary, and he was concerned to secure the maximum safety of the Russian soldiers that would be involved. This rather suggests that the protests and complaints from families of soldiers about the fate of their loved ones has been seriously starting to cut through some of the propaganda noise. Hence Putin's attempt to position himself as championing their concerns to the military. And it was remarkable theatre because, in principle, such strategic decisions are well below Putin's pay grade. So to film this discussion, making a specific intervention like this is incredibly unusual. Now, the other remarkable thing was just how depressed and ill both men looked. Shoigu has been mostly absent from public view in recent weeks, which had fueled the speculation that he had had heart problems. In this meeting, he had to read his words. He was held to have slurred some of them, notably, suggesting that speculation might have substance. Putin has likewise been the source of speculation, given his puffy face of recent weeks, suggesting that he may be on treatment with steroids. It was noted that throughout the session, he tightly gripped the corner of the table in a rather odd fashion, not the sort of thing that he would normally be expected to do. All of that is speculation, probably stirred in with a teaspoon of wishful thinking on the part of the Western pundits. Maybe. Nevertheless, it was an odd event. On the ground, the fierce fighting has continued. One top Russian commander said today that they aim to occupy all of southern Ukraine, right to the border with Moldova, as well as taking the Donbass. Now, if that was true, and, trusting what the Russian state has to say about its war aims is a bit of a mug's game, but if it was true, this would reflect an expansion of Moscow's war goals and an expectation that a great deal more fighting is still to come. It could perfectly well be simply a continuation of a strategy of keeping the other side in doubt, never knowing quite what's going to happen next. From Russia's point of view, if you can divert some of your enemy to places that you know you have no intention of going because they think you might, that reduces the forces that can be concentrated amongst your real targets. Meanwhile, just to try to offset some of the derisory commentary on Russia's bad start to its Ukraine war, President Putin launched a new intercontinental ballistic missile this week, one capable of firing up to 15 nuclear warheads at a time. Dubbed the Satan II by Western analysts, Putin claimed it could overcome all modern means of missile defence. The missile is said to have a range of over 6,200 miles. The different warheads would detach and travel towards their respective targets at hypersonic speeds. Because of the added range, it would be able to go under the South Pole and attack the United States from the direction not currently covered by air defence systems. Now, that's probably more symbolic than anything. since those systems would not stop an all-out nuclear strike anyway, which is the only scenario you would see that weapon being used. Admiral Chaz Richard, Chief of the US Strategic Command, told Congress that although the US capability remains strong, there is evidence of a growing deterrence and assurance gap. Not helped by the fact that Russia wasn't the only one this week to be flexing its muscles by shooting rockets into the air. China's Navy was reported to have launched a hypersonic anti-ship missile from a cruiser, adding to its growing capabilities with weapons that can travel at more than 5 times the speed of sound. Now, the point about such weapons is that the speed they travel at makes it pretty much impossible with current technology to reliably intercept them before they hit their target, rendering air defences more or less useless. Video of the launch of the YJ-21 missile prompted analysts to observe that the missile ups the threat that China can offer to American aircraft carriers. It'll be fitted onto heavily armed Type 055 cruisers, which, if hypersonic missiles are added, will become one of the most powerful warships in the world. China currently has 8 of them. Mind you, China has other things to worry about, and we will come to those in just a minute. But first, there's something that rules the world. I mean, genuinely, through history, it has been one of the most decisive, important factors in how the world runs, in how power works. We rarely talk about it in any kind of a sensible way. Historians rarely even acknowledge it. And when people do focus on it, as they have done quite a lot in the last couple of years, they do so oftenly misunderstanding the nature of it, so that they turn it into a clownish parody of reality. What is this key element in how power gets exercised in the world you live in? Well, tell me what you think it is in the comments below. Then join me on Monday for a deep dive exploration that will not only tell you about the history and power of this thing, but will also give you clues as to how it could even benefit you in your own life. All rather mysterious, I know! That video going live on Monday next week, 7 PM UK time. Join me for that. China has been concerned that its dreams of overtaking America as the world economic superpower will be undermined by its expected move from being a growing population to being a shrinking one. Now, it seems as though that decline might already be here, about a decade earlier than was expected. China's population is expected to decline this year for the first time. The number of people aged 65 and over was 14% of the total last year, which apparently is enough to make China an aged society. Zheng Bingwen from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences said that aging would lead to a decline in savings, which would in turn impact on investment. He also said that the process would not stop there, and China was on track to become a super-aged society by 2035, with more than 20% of the population over 65 years old. To give you a sense of how quickly this is changing, in 2019, 14.65 million babies were born in China. 2020, that was down to 12 million. Last year, it was down to 10.6 million. That is an astonishing collapse in numbers, unseen since Mao's Great Famine of 60 years ago. Yi Fujian of the University of Wisconsin-Madison told the Financial Times that the zero COVID policy this year could make things worse. Many young couples are scared of becoming pregnant because China's lockdown measures are so strict. Without any warning, your apartment building or whole neighbourhood could be locked down if a case emerges. And this is what we've been seeing in recent weeks, particularly in Shanghai, where toddlers have been routinely separated from their families if one of them tests positive for COVID, sometimes even when they don't. And we've seen footage as well of people being harangued by drones, ordering them to step aside from their windows and don't sing from their balconies. And even video of live cats all being stuffed into sacks as people's pets are being rounded up to be destroyed. Now, these are the policies, remember, that Chinese Premier Xi Jinping boasted about because they were so much better for the people than the West's failed COVID policies. But the point is, they're not even working anymore. The newest Omicron variant is so much more transmissible, it has clearly broken through China's policy measures and has reached levels that seem beyond hope of control. Indeed, top Chinese scientists have said as much. Zhong Nanshen published a paper in English in the National Science Review arguing this: China needs to reopen so as to normalise socio-economic development and adapt to global reopening. Prolonged dynamic zeroing cannot be pursued in the long run. And the paper then detailed approaches that the government could take. The Chinese government responded to this paper by banning its Chinese translation from the internet. This is why autocratic regimes defeat themselves sooner or later, because no one is allowed to speak truth to power, so mistakes get perpetuated. And lockdowns, although the most visible, are certainly not the only mistakes. Scientists are also trying to warn against the use of traditional Chinese herbal cures as a treatment for COVID-19. The medicine in question is recommended to treat mild cases of COVID in China's official handbook, in spite of the fact it probably has no effect whatsoever. But in any case, its efficacy hasn't been properly studied. In an article published on a medical information website in China, Dingjiang Yisheng, Professor Rao Yi wrote, "Regrettably, Linhua Qingwen cannot prevent COVID infection." And he's writing this because the popularity of Linhua Qingwen has risen strongly during the pandemic. Why? Probably because, in echoes of President Trump and hydroxychloroquine, President Xi Jinping is a big fan of traditional medicine. When did we enter the era when political leaders adopt their favourite medications all the time? Is this now something we just have to resign ourselves to as a thing going forward? Abandon Labour Party and Conservative Party, we'll have Team Aspirin versus Team Ibuprofen. I suppose it's no more stupid than some of the things that are actually happening, but I digress. In addition, of course, China's homegrown vaccines have generally been less effective in use than the Western alternatives. But that can't be acknowledged because national pride is at stake. So, with the less effective vaccines added to the fact that a significant percentage of those older people have not been vaccinated, you have a recipe for some significant impact from China's out-of-control Omicron wave, which it seems unlikely herbal medicine will be able to overcome. Now, we know, remember, that Omicron is less deadly than previous versions, but even so, with an unprotected, vulnerable population, you would expect some significant scale of casualties. There is always the autocrats' fallback, of course, which is simply to lie to the world about how many people are dying. Just 6 days ago, they were reporting that in spite of the current wave, nobody had died from COVID since 2020 in the city of Shanghai. The BBC reported that at that time, that a worker at one elderly care hospital had told them that in that single location, at least 27 patients had died. They'd been required to record the deaths as underlying health problems. By Wednesday this week, the authorities had conceded 17 deaths in total. It's clearly been many more. Part of the problem, again, is that Xi Jinping has made the country's low death rates from COVID a huge pillar of its national pride and legitimacy, so it cannot be seen to fail. Reportedly, this has led to some officials being fired from their jobs if even a few cases are detected in their jurisdictions. Which, of course, is exactly why you get extreme policies on the ground as the middle managers desperately try to cover their backs. Shi Chen, professor of public health at Yale, said that the need to minimise COVID deaths was incentivising public health officials to neglect other causes of death in order to keep their COVID numbers down. Obviously, that's an approach that can end up with many more people dying overall, just fewer that are officially down to COVID. China does not report aggregate figures of excess mortality, which have often been important in the West to seeing when official COVID figures were overstating or understating likely numbers of deaths. Of course, the Chinese lockdowns now going on are also not helping the bigger picture, with supply chain pressure already intense because of the energy crisis and related Ukraine war. Indeed, the consequences of the war continue to develop. The Financial Times reported that March food prices were up 34% relative to last year, with cereals up by 37%, vegetable oils by 56%, both strongly affected by Ukraine events. The price increases at commodity level turned into much bigger increases for some countries at the point of consumption. So, for instance, Africa and the Middle East have been prime markets for Ukraine and Russia. Wheat prices increased in Somalia by 160% in just 1 month. Somalia traditionally gets 85% of its grain from Ukraine and Russia. Their position has not been improved by poor rainfall instances this year. The World Food Programme says that it leaves almost 40% of Somalis on the brink. Elsewhere, the impact of corn prices is creating some pushback against its use as a base for biofuel. Prices are going up as the corn is used as a substitute for wheat by some countries. A study by the NGO Transport and Environment estimated that the equivalent of 10,000 tonnes of wheat, or 15 million loaves of bread, are being burned as ethanol fuel every single day in the European Union, which they described as immoral in the face of a global food crisis. But right now the pressure's going the other way. So, for instance, US President Biden lifted restrictions on the sale of higher ethanol content gasoline in an attempt to offset rising oil prices. That is likely to push up overall demand for corn and hence increase its prices even further. Some of the countries that have traditionally not exported much of their homegrown food, such as India, are starting to take advantage of the higher global prices. So India has a huge annual wheat production. Typically, it only exports 1% of it, since it's such a key staple for its own population. But it's now reported to have signed a wheat deal with Egypt to export about 1 million tonnes. Now, it's not necessarily going to be that easy for India simply to clean up financially, because a sudden heatwave in the Punjab impacted wheat production there by about 8% of the total crop, along with impacts from high prices and availability of fertilisers. This is not yet the full reality, but it is the illustration of the principle, one of the key arguments around the vulnerability of the global food system to climate change. When you have a large world population reliant on certain important breadbasket regions, you have a system that's only as resilient as the likelihood that 2 or more of them get hit by climate disruption, or indeed any other kind, such as war or pandemic, at the same time. That resilience is being tested in 2022. It looks like it'll come through, but with consequences to a number of countries and a lot of people. We could really do, though, with a year where we don't get any additional major climate events in any of those areas. Now, in a minute, we'll have a few words for the dismal tale of how the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson continues to cling to power by his fingertips, as more of his party decide that they've had enough of so-called Partygate. But first, just a quick heads up, I will be releasing a fun one-off video over the weekend. The Financial Times has an online game where you go through and make choices to take the world to net zero by 2050. I thought it would be interesting to do the game on camera. We can explore together the policies and the choices they've imagined for us, the dilemmas we have to face, maybe some of the assumptions behind the choices we might wish to challenge, who knows. And of course, then the final question at the end. Did I manage to save the world without having to do extraordinarily dumb things in order to get there? I think you'll find it entertaining, so join me for that, going live in the next couple of days. Boris Johnson apologised to the House of Commons again. This time for the fact that he had received a fixed penalty notice from the police for breaking lockdown rules. On the one hand, you might say, hold on a minute, Malin, we've been talking about the big geopolitical issues and war and world domination and famine and all of that. Now we're talking about parties at 10 Downing Street? Yes, indeed. The issue, however, isn't how serious the original offence was or wasn't, recognising some people feel very strongly about that. It is now focused on whether the Prime Minister lied about it to the House of Commons. Not so much the offence, but the cover-up. Intentionally misleading the House is seen as much more important as an issue of parliamentary integrity and has always held to be a resigning issue if and when it's proven. The Labour opposition brought a motion to the House that Johnson should be investigated on that specifically. The government took the position that it would simply tell its MPs to vote against this opposition motion. Given its comfortable majority, that should then sort it. Reportedly, at least 6 junior ministers in the government told the whips they would resign, they would not support a plan to push back any investigation. And an unspecified number of Tory backbenchers also threatened to at least abstain, potentially in sufficient numbers to make defeat possible. So the government caved in and permitted the investigation to go ahead. That now moves to the Commons Privileges Committee to examine the evidence. The committee is made up of 7 MPs. 4 of them are Conservative, 3 of them are opposition members. So you might think that Johnson has got nothing to worry about, especially since the Labour chairman, Chris Bryant, has recused himself from this inquiry on the grounds that he'd already got on record as accusing the Prime Minister of lying. But 2 of the Conservative members of the committee, Sir Bernard Jenkin and Andy Carter, have demonstrated their independence of mind in recent years. Given the strong feelings amongst many in the Conservative ranks, the government can probably take absolutely nothing for granted. Now, this investigation won't begin until the police investigations and fines have concluded, and that is now likely to be on hold until the local elections in May. Plus, then there's the parliamentary summer recess. So rejoice if Johnson manages to survive in the meantime, not to be presumed, but if he does, yay, we will still be talking about this in the autumn. One thing Boris Johnson has not given way to his backbenchers on, apparently, is green levies on fuel bills. In spite of the fact that energy prices are soaring and expected to cause real problems to people on low incomes, the government will keep levies to pay for renewable energy subsidies. The levies add £153 to the average electricity bill. The Prime Minister said that green technology was helping to move the energy supply away from fossil fuels, the high price of which right now is the main thing driving those higher bills. In fact, the UK does not specifically tie individual taxes to specific spending commitments, what's called hypothecation. So there's actually nothing to stop the government from ending or pausing the levy while the prices are high and paying for subsidies from central taxation, should they choose. But the government is reluctant to remove the levy for all, since many of the people in the country can perfectly well afford to pay it. Some are arguing instead that relief should be specifically targeted at the poorest people. If that's what they decide to do, you'd think they should probably get on with it, since the opponents of net zero are already seeing this as a highly effective campaign weapon against what they see as ideological greenery. Watch this space. How you see the world is shaped by what you focus on. Let me give you an example. A recent YouGov poll in the United States showed that Americans generally believe that 41% of Americans are black. The actual figure's 12%. And that's not just dumb white folks, by the way. Black Americans specifically believe it's even higher, at 52%. Americans believe that 29% of the population is Asian, rather than 6% in reality. 39% Hispanic, rather than 17%. 27% Native American, rather than 1%. That means that Americans believe that 136% of Americans are not white. And it doesn't stop there. Americans believe that 30% of Americans are gay, which is 10 times higher than reality. 21% are transgender, 1 in 5. True figure, 0.6%. 30% are thought to be vegan or vegetarian, true figure 5%, and they think that 20% of Americans make more than $1 million per year. True figure is vanishingly small, it rounds to zero. And no, this isn't just about Americans. In the UK a couple of years ago, for instance, we saw that Brits believed that 7% of the population had died of COVID, when at the time it was something like 0.07% or something. All of us, all humanity, is susceptible to this. Your brain perceives the world always through a filter. It's looking for the important stuff that it needs in order to survive, and the media feeds us a relentless diet of bad news, because our brains, hungry to know about what might be dangerous to us, always prioritises bad news over good. And then, of course, we have modern campaigns amongst the, for want of a better word, the elites. Diversity. We now have to see black and brown faces in every television programme, even in historical dramas about times and places where such faces were either absent or were only visible in certain contexts. Now, promoting diversity in drama is seen as more important than having dramas be historically accurate. And I get that it's done for the best of intentions. It is still distorting our understanding of reality. Likewise, certain issues become fashionable and get talked about a lot, others significantly less so. Our brains see those cues and assume that the high-profile issues must be more damaging, more urgent, more important, because they're high-profile. Surely one follows the other. To some extent, we can't help this. The one thing you should focus on, in my view, is the negativity bias. We are bombarded by the negative, and some of it's important. I talk about plenty of it here, hopefully always with a sense of perspective, but it's still one of the things that's most interesting in life to discuss. But we have a rising tide of anxiety in young people across the world, and not just young people, by the way, by the first-hand accounts of some of you who have contacted me from time to time. Some of this is eco-anxiety, fed by society's relentless focus on climate change. Some of it is the distorting effect of social media, which has algorithms that magnify the harms. And some of it is just the negativity bias of mainstream media, selling its advertising for clicks. If there was any one area where it would benefit you being an effective and happy person in the world, it would be understanding that much and never allowing yourself to wallow in the negative. Facing up to the negative, that's useful. Developing strategies for possible setbacks in the future, that's smart. Wallowing in the negative is poisonous. If you find yourself doing that, cutting yourself off from the stream that's leading you into that mindset, at least for a while, so that you can regain a sense of perspective. Probably the best all-round defensive tactic. Managing your exposure to extreme perspectives or cynicism and fear of the world, arguably it's a key skill for the digital age. Something we should probably be teaching our children once we've learned it for ourselves. All right, hopefully you will never feel that you need to limit your time here for the good of your health. You would expect me to believe that the independent, fact-focused and non-ideological content that I aim to produce here is exactly the antidote to things like eco-anxiety and the like. Fortunately, a number of good people agree, so much so that they actively support this channel on Patreon. And that support is what helps make it possible for me to produce these videos at all. So my thanks to them as always. And if you would like to join them, you would be very welcome. Head on over to patreon.com/MalanBaker. It is always appreciated. Either way, have a great week. My name's Malan Baker. This is The Malan Baker Show. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please share with anyone else you think would also enjoy it. Word of mouth is really important to us. And if you've not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? As the saying goes, that subscribe button won't smash itself.